Hey everyone, it's Crystal from Sober Onions podcast. I'm very excited. It is the fall, and in California, it is absolutely beautiful. I'm very excited today. I have Ryan Dusick from the Maroon 5 band, who's the founding drummer, but we're really excited and we're talking today about his new book, Harder to Breathe, that is being released November 15th, but you can pre-order it now. So I'm going to introduce you to Ryan, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. So, hey, Ryan, what's up?
Hi, Crystal. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Absolutely. The honor is mine. I'm very excited. I was thrilled to hear that I was going to get this opportunity. And I read your book. I love it. So I don't want to spoil everything, but we will definitely go through the things that I felt like I related to the most, because I know everyone's going to want to read it for themselves. And like everything, everyone kind of takes things differently. And I feel like your book is going to reach such a huge audience because it not only is entertaining, but you're also very transparent and vulnerable about things that probably nobody really knows about you. And I feel like that's what we're doing here is we are being transparent about our stories, and we are sharing the hope of recovery, because I can tell you there is no way you could have told me 2 years ago that I would be talking about not having a drink. There is no way. I mean, the fact that I have gone like 540 days without a drink is absolutely astounding to me. And I know you are about 6.5 years sober, right?
Yes, I am. And congratulations on 540 days. That's absolutely amazing.
It really is. It's like I feel like the first couple months were sort of a blur, because the first couple months are just so hard. And then the next couple months it just feels like all the change is what's hard. It's just you're getting a whole new lifestyle. And you talk about that in your book, and you talk about that being something, a part of your personal relationships too, because so much changes, not just not drinking, but your surroundings change, your motives change, your priorities change. There's so much, and it's not for the worse, it's for the better. But we're so conditioned to, that quick fix of, I want that drink and now I cannot feel as much and now I can move on and push that down. So I'm really excited to introduce you to the Sober Onions fans. I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about you. You grew up in Los Angeles, same as me. I grew up in Los Angeles County. So we're only a couple years apart. I believe we're 2 years apart. So we would have been going to high school at the same time and college at the same time, and probably about 25 miles apart. So it was really incredible reading your book and just putting myself in those timelines and relating to the fact that you and I were almost the same age. We were in the same state. We were going through two parallel different lifestyles. You were in a incredibly famous rock band or pop band. It kind of like shift all over the place until you guys found what you wanted as Maroon 5. And I was, going to high school. I moved to Australia. I came back. I got married. I had kids. I had serious complications. I was at UCLA for 6 months while you were in college at UCLA. So it was just so many things that I just really, really related to. But now it's incredible that you're an associate marriage and family therapist. You are the founding drummer of the world famous Maroon 5. You're the author of Harder to Breathe, which is what we're going to talk about today. And your life went from this aspiring pop star with anxiety, which is something we really will touch on today, to a heartbroken alcoholic. But now I love the most that you write in your book is that you are a mental health survivor. And I love that term. And I hope we can hashtag it or spread the word. I don't know, like whatever these kids do these days. My kids are always telling me how I need to work on my social media and that I do not deserve to be on TikTok because my videos are terrible. So, so I pretty much have one platform, which is Instagram. So, and that's about all I can handle. But you founded the group Cars Flowers with Adam Levine, Jesse Carmichael, Mickey Madden, and you guys worked so hard for 10 years. I mean, not even just going through the motions of a career and fame, it really was tough. It was an artistic creation in my mind. Is very difficult, and that's what makes you so eclectic and so neat and now famous. And now you are obviously giving back, which I commend you, because to me, I love fame and I love fortune, but to me, when I see someone's integrity and when they want to help someone else, to me that is bigger than any fame that you could ever have. So I want to commend you for that. I mean, it is pretty cool that you got 2 Grammys and sold 20 million records. I mean, but I really do think that your sobriety is really your biggest accomplishment, because you will help more people than you will ever imagine, probably save lives from people taking them, because that seems to be a pretty quick solution these days lately. And we want to let people know that sobriety is possible, and so is recovery. So I'm going to hand the floor to you, Ryan, and why don't you tell us a little bit about you, and let's talk about where you come from, and then I'd love to dig into this new book of yours.
All right. Well, thank you. That was quite a thorough introduction. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you kind of said it all, but I'm on this journey now as a therapist, and just wanting to tell my story, as you said, in a very open and honest and transparent way, because I feel that that's the best way for people to relate to your experience, relate their experience to yours, and see the hope and recovery that exists in people like you and me, who have finally turned a page in our life and found the hope and recovery. So I'm telling my story and trying to be just as vulnerable and honest about it as I can, for that reason. And I just get to be of service to people in a lot of different ways at this point in my life, and that's really the best part of my recovery.
It's incredible. So Harder to Breathe comes out November 15th, but how long did it take you to write this book? I'm curious.
Well, it kind of went in stages. I started writing, well, okay, I thought about writing the book probably about 10 years ago. Of course, I was drinking at the time, so it would have been a very different book. Honestly, I didn't know what the purpose was at that point. I had a story to tell, but I didn't know why I would be telling it, other than to just put out a book. And but then I got sober, and I went on. I started this new journey of recovery, and being of service was a big part of it. That was a big part of what gave me new purpose in life, and ended up with me going back to school and pursuing a master's degree in clinical psychology. And when you're in grad school studying clinical psychology, you have to do a lot of self-reflection, which I had already been doing in my own therapy, but I was writing papers about it now, So it kind of just one day, I think it was right when quarantine started, actually in 2019, the book just started coming out of me. I just felt like I had a story to tell, and now I had an ending that was hopeful and that had a message of recovery. So the first draft, I kind of poured out in like a couple months. It was really quick, and I felt really inspired. But I got some good advice from another author, a very accomplished author, David Fisher, who told me, go to an editor, work on this some more, and get it to where it's almost finished, really, before you reach out to agents or publishers, because you'll be in a much better position if you do that. So I got a great editor. I worked on a second draft for about 4 months, and then it was pretty close to done. But then I went through the whole year of trying to find an agent, then a publisher. And anyway, so finally I had a publisher. We did the final edit. So it was over a couple years, but really only maybe a total of 6 months of writing.
That's incredible, because you start the book out, really reliving memories of like you and your brother, like jumping on a bed and being these like super energetic rock stars, and you just having this personality that just glows. And to me, like, I mean, we're in our 40s, so remembering way back then, to have that detailed of a memory, I thought it was really great way to start out the book. Not to mention, I mean, Adam Levine, did your forward, which I thought his perspective on you was very cool, because your perspective on him is different as well. And I definitely learned to respect him a lot more after reading your book, because you could really see what outsiders could see, but also what you saw inside. And so just the fact that you had all the record keeping of how your your band became is huge. People have no idea what it was like for you guys. There's no way. For me, it's like all of a sudden Maroon 5, they've got a Grammy, right? And you guys, you tour, I think I read in the book, you drove the US and like 5 times, right? Is that how it was? So it was like you guys started in high school and then you got on the road. So why don't you tell me about just about the first part of the book, and then I'll kind of ask you a couple more questions.
Yeah, I tried to give context for everything, and be really meticulous about the experience of, where I got to and where I've been and how I've gotten to where I am now. It wasn't hard for me to be meticulous. It's my nature. I'm a perfectionist. So I try to think I try to think that I use my perfectionism for good now rather than for really crippling myself with with not being able to follow through and finish anything. Now, yeah, I just meticulousness is part of my nature. So I went through the timeline. That was the one of the first things I did. I just went through and I kind of mapped everything out that I could get down in terms of just the real crucial points of the band's career and my life and how they correspond with them, so that I had a structure that I was going to be working through. And I wanted to do a chapter, of course, on my childhood to give, the background of my psychology and where I came from and all that. But, the meat of the book is about, the journey with the band. The middle section, probably the middle half of the book, is about from the start of the band to when I leave the band. And that really was, think about it. For me, it was age 16 to age 28. So, a lot of changes, quite a journey from 4 kids that started a band in my parents' garage, in 1994, emulating Pearl Jam and Nirvana and Soundgarden and all those grunge bands, to, in 2004, playing in arenas all over the world. So you can imagine, just the journey between those dates of everything it took to get to that point. 2 different record labels, putting out an album that failed and having to figure out if we were going to keep going on and what kind of band we were going to be, and reinventing ourselves and, rediscovering our friendship and our commitment to one another. So there's a lot of relationship stuff in there. There's a lot of personal stuff about what I was going through in my mental health. And it all kind of leads to this crisis in my life when I left the band, which is, the bigger arc of the story, which is about my mental health journey, the alcoholism that came, and the recovery that comes later.
I thought it was excellent. Every time I turn the chapter, the names of your chapters are excellent. It made me curious about what you were going to say next, which I love that. I think when I was reading, like you said, like the bulk of it, I kept thinking he's going to reach so many people with this book, because this is a book, not only someone who is in recovery, someone maybe that is sober curious. This is something that people can really read and enjoy. It, like, just broad spectrum. I mean, this is something I could hand to my dad, who is a musician, and say, Dad, you'll really enjoy this book. It's very telling how things come together. And so that to me was really amazing, that you could capture so many people in just one book. It really was amazing. And you really talk about all the different things that you did, as far as like all the people that you met. And I was like cracking up at some of these, because again, we grew up the same time. So I was that teenage girl who saw Titanic, and to this day, Titanic and Leonardo DiCaprio are like my favorite. And in the book, you start talking about how Leonardo DiCaprio like flips off your mom. I was cracking up. I was like, is this for real? Like, I feel like there was prominent people that you talked about that I was so curious that, like, what was it like? So like, out of all the, I mean, there's a list. I can't even name all the people. The people that were prominent to me were like Justin Timberlake and Kanye and Jessica Simpson and, Paris Hilton and all these incredibly talented people. But I know those people stuck out to you for your book. Was there anybody like really in particular that you felt not like famous, but like maybe that's the life that I would want to lead?
Well, there were 2 people that stand out to me as being the biggest moments of like, oh my God, like I can't believe I'm actually meeting this person. Maybe 3 people. The first one was probably Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin. That was just like, you, that's not, he actually wanted to meet us, was the weird thing. He was like, I'm a fan of your album.
And
And I
you're
was
like,
like, this is
what?
so backward, like we're supposed to be saying, bowing at your feet, not you,
Here's
complimenting
my
us.
Sharpie. Just take a picture. Can you sign my forehead?
And then of course we got to meet and go to Prince's house.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so just seeing him and at least what it looked like on the surface, his lifestyle of just jamming with incredible musicians and having the most incredibly talented people at his house for a party, that was pretty an incredible thing to see. And just um I don't know if it's something that I aspired to, but it was definitely a moment that I was wowed, because he's like one of the greatest, was one of the greatest musicians I've ever seen up close before. The one that's probably most stands out of my mind is Stevie Wonder, though,
Yeah.
because we were the biggest Stevie Wonder fans when we were making songs about Jane. And we got to do a charity event with him, and he came on stage with us, and you hear that voice and that harmonica sound coming through your stage monitor, and that's just something you don't expect to experience in your life, just so iconic. And if there's anyone who's a magical human being, it's Stevie Wonder.
That is incredible. I was curious about that because you really, becoming famous, you ran into so many people to a point where it was like you were going on the Tonight Show, you were on Ellen DeGeneres, you know what I mean? It was just incredible, all the things that you got to experience. And I think that's one of the things I like about the book the most, is that I'm kind of able to live through you vicariously a little bit, because maybe the people that, you had a core memory or an aha moment, like wasn't the same for me in your book. I was like, oh my gosh, he met that person. Oh my gosh, this. And so it was really cool that you had um, that personal feel where I could read it in a way that I could relate to it, because I'm someone who will never go through something like that. So how do it's like touching the stars, right? And so to see your take on it, and how how you said, like in high school, all the rich kids you had been around, and like how things seemed to be very rehearsed and very PR related, and it was very lonely. And to us, it's like social media just plasters that as this glamorous life. And you also say it wasn't all bad. These were all the great things. So I loved how you were able to really like bring it down to a relatable level, but also, holy cow, like this is what I did. I was in Asia and I was doing this, I was in Australia. So I really thought that was cool. When you were you kind of bring Sarah, is it Sarah Bareilles, right? Am I saying that right? Okay.
Yeah.
I love her, by the way. I've done a lot of routines to her music. Like I told you, I owned a dance studio for 12 years.
Mhm.
And I was reading, how much she supported you, and like there were certain people like John Mayer who would introduce your band, like things he didn't have to do, but like that he did, that really meant a lot to you. Do you want to talk about that, or how it affected you? I know Bono and John Mayer sort of liked your girlfriend, which your girlfriend Sean is very prominent in this book. So I don't know if you can kind of just touch on what it was like for you to be in that situation, but also have a relationship, but also starting a party, but also going to UCLA and getting your degrees. Like, what was it like for you when you look back at it now, in summary, but don't ruin it for everybody so they can read the book?
Well, yeah, some of those relationships, I tried to, include a lot of people that were important in our lives and really touch on the relationships that were there. Most importantly, obviously, within the band. But there were other people along the journey that were really important to us. That's kind of why I delved in deeply to my time at UCLA, because those were people that were really special to me and a really important time in my life in terms of discovering myself. And Sarah Bareilles was one of those people at UCLA who was a close friend, obviously extremely talented and just a really cool person. And actually, she was, just playing at coffee houses and, playing with us at the bar in Westwood some nights. And I was trying to get people to notice her, when we got signed again to our second deal. I made a little demo with her and played it for our record label. I was trying to get people to notice her. And for whatever reason at that moment, even though she was already extremely gifted and talented and had some great songs, it just, the timing wasn't right yet. But fast forward a couple of years, she started working with our manager and got a record deal. And so she came a little bit behind us, a couple of years, I think, in terms of her own success. And I was just it's just amazing to me to look at her now, and from afar. We talk every now and then, but she's been very helpful in terms of certain aspects of this book. And she wrote a Broadway musical, and she's performing all over it's just the things that she's doing in her career. I'm just so proud of her. So putting her in the book in the small ways that I did, I just wanted to pay homage to that relationship, and such a special person in my life. Yeah, I mean, the other people you mentioned, John Mayer was very kind. He's a funny dude, and our experience with him was great. It was at a pivotal moment in our career when we had our first single kind of starting to take off, and moving on to our second single. And he did some things he didn't have to do to help promote us, and that was very kind. And we had quite a journey with him. Anyway, so yeah, these relationships and these moments in life that were pivotal and important to me, I tried to include. I think every story that I put in there serves some function. Sometimes it's just comic relief, because there's a lot of heavy stuff in this book, certainly in terms of mental health and alcoholism, and the things that I was struggling through. You need some fun stories in there. You need some funny, just humorous stuff to keep it afloat. But then also, just things that were going on for other people that I could either be, it was like a foil or a mirror for me, or something that related to my journey and gave some context, to the things that I was going through. I think that some of the stories with famous celebrities, I think just gives context for, like, this is what my life looked like at that moment when I was really struggling, and that duality, between the public persona and what was going on internally. So I think that, all that stuff that I put in the book, it's there for a reason. It's not just, to just purely to entertain, but hopefully it is entertaining.
It really was. I got a kick out of a lot of things. I was cracking up. I actually Googled a lot of things, to be honest, because it was bringing me back to some of my own points in that time. And I was thinking, where was I at that moment, And I really liked that. But yeah, there was a lot of fun stuff in there. And one of the things you talked about that I think really circles back to mental health was you felt like you tried to alienate yourself sometimes even on the stage you'd feel alone, sometimes you even in a group of friends you'd feel alone, sometimes you needed that liquid courage, right, which everybody kind of needs to loosen up, right? And one of the things you talked about was getting kind of a glimpse, like when you and Sean had to like run to Paris Hilton's like limo, and you just were like, wow, but it's still lonely, And I really felt like people who deal with mental health probably feel like the world's a paparazzi, right? So it's like you don't necessarily have to be famous, because what's happening to you is happening. And
Mhm.
and to me, I can relate with that, because there were so many times in my life, and especially at what we call the end, right? When it comes the worst in our minds, is being, in a shower crying, just like, I don't feel like I belong on earth. Like, what am I giving back to earth? Wouldn't everybody just be better if I was gone? And I'm not somebody who's ever tried to commit suicide or anything, but I can tell you that I have had those thoughts. I've had those, what am I doing here? And I had known that I had impacted a lot of people before recovery with my career and my kids and everything that I had gone through, but it didn't matter in that moment, because once I got to that low point, I either just wanted to sleep or I just wanted to be alone. And it was something I couldn't control. And so it was very frustrating, especially because I couldn't predict when those times were coming. And
Mhm.
so to me, the control was a drink. right? So it was like, I can control this by drinking. So that's sort of where, my demise was, not to mention, I did the opposite. COVID sort of drove me to drinking all day. My dance studio had closed. My kids weren't talking to me anymore because they had just had enough, because I would go to work and I would go to my studio and they got the good version of me. And then I would come home and drink. So a lot of people don't talk about that. They don't talk about the home life. And I grew up like you, I grew up in a loving, my parents don't drink. I grew up in a very Christian home. And so there was like no excuse for all of this. And so I couldn't place my depression or the way I felt. And so because I had no example, the only example I had was how I felt. And when I drank, I felt better. And so I noticed when you start talking about that in the book, how once you were asked to step aside from drumming, which for everyone that doesn't know, because I didn't know, it was from a baseball injury. And then you ended up, right, because it was like nerve damage, and then it kind of just turned into anxiety, and it just, just that you had a lot of issues with your shoulder. And so I don't think people realize like how defeating it can be when you have the skill and capability and then it gets taken away from you. And so you talk about that in your book, but I kind of just wanted to ask you, what was it like coming down? Because like you said, the meat of the book is how, Maroon 5 got started, all the relationships, but then you're at that point where you're starting to see your performances declining. What was that like for you?
Well, it was devastating. And I think the hardest part of it was that I couldn't really understand what was happening to me at the time. Um, it is a lot more complicated than to just say that it was a shoulder injury. Um, and I knew that on some level. On some deeper level, I knew that what was going on for me was to do with my entire constitution and not just one limb or one joint. But I couldn't verbalize it at that point. I didn't have the vocabulary. I certainly didn't have the emotional maturity to be able to express what I was feeling to another human being. I just felt like there was something defective in me, and that it was just a matter of time before I was going to go down in flames, because it was getting harder and harder to play. I was playing through pain. My mechanics were already not great and then getting worse. So at a certain point, of course, it started affecting my playing, because my coordination was just getting worse, and I couldn't play things the way that I used to. And at a certain point, the band, of course, could tell. I mean, I don't know at what point they were starting to recognize that my playing was suffering, until it was really obvious to all of us, and there was something needed to be done. But it was devastating even before it ended for me, because, like I said, I was feeling that sense of failure, that sense of feeling defective, like there was something just inherently wrong with me, that I couldn't do this. And why this thing that I loved so much and I was so passionate about and I had worked so hard to achieve, here we were on the biggest stage, playing on, live TV on Saturday Night Live, and playing, in arenas around the world, and having our songs played on the radio 24/7 all over the world. How could this happen, that at this point in our career, a decade in, my body was breaking down, my mind was breaking down, my spirit was being broken, you know? So when it finally ended, in some ways, at that very moment, it was a bit of a relief, because it was a slow moving trauma, it was something that happened over time, and playing through that and seeing every moment that we might have a break evaporate and having to keep going. That was, just like trauma after trauma, in terms of having to play through the pain and the suffering of that. But then when it ended, there was like a little bit of a feeling of like, okay, I can move on with my life. But then I went into a deep depression. And that's when things kind of went into the deep end in terms of the alcoholism and the isolation, and I was dealing with grief a really intense level of grief about the life and the identity that I had lost, that was wrapped up in being the drummer in that band and being in the center of our social sphere. So it was, to answer your question, a really, really difficult time for me.
I'm sure. Yeah, I related to so much of it when I was reading it. I just kept thinking to myself, and what also made me think was everyone reading this is going to think of themselves, which I think that's why your book is going to do so well, because it will reach so many different people. When you get towards the end of the book, which is really just kind of up, you're kind of like getting on your feet again. You're starting to, realize that this is an issue. You just got, asked to not play with the band anymore. You're dealing with feelings of jealousy, feelings of depression, feelings of, you're still going through, you had major jet lag all the time from traveling so much and being on tour. And you then check yourself into a rehab because you have this like anxiety attack, right? That was like, it kind of scared, like you said, scared you into it. And when you got there, it was like, do I belong here? Because, everyone here is dealing with a court case or with, hard drugs. And I felt the exact same way. I went to detox in Tarzana, and it was like the worst. I can't even my perception of it was probably terrifying because I was like you, like I was shaking and, getting off alcohol. So it was just total mess. And I had to share a room with a woman who was taking fentanyl. So she was throwing up all the time, and it was COVID. So they had to just keep us secluded. We couldn't even eat dinner together, lunch, breakfast, everything was by yourself. So it was just like this huge issue. And you say in the book, and I related this to you so much, how you just said, okay, I need to just get this out of my system and start drinking like a gentleman, right? It's like what everyone thinks, like, okay, I've tried everything. I'm not going to drink, I'll just drink wine and not drink vodka and all this stuff. We all do it. It's so funny because every single person has that in common. And then you say, I've been dry before. I did the dry February. It has the least amount of days in the month. And I just started cracking up. I was like, why didn't I think of that one? It was so good. So you really just start being transparent about your life on the road, your relationship with Sean, your relationship with your parents. And I love that about the book, that you're just so transparent. And I don't want to keep spoiling it for everybody because I want everybody to read it. But it really, at the end, you really talk about the program that you chose. And you chose the AA program, and that's the program that I chose. We both got sober in May, which is so funny. And I related so much to it because even the verbiage that you had, I was like, okay, like we're in the same program. Like you didn't even have to say anything, and I knew what program we're in because it's a repetitive program and it works. It's been working for hundreds of years. But my question is, now that you're, an advocate for mental health, you're working in the industry, how do you encourage people who are dealing with addiction or alcoholism or, depression or suicide?
Well, first off, I do think that the 12 steps, is a wonderful program, and that's available to everyone, and it's free, and so it has so many elements to it that are necessary and really helpful in recovery in terms of peer support, a sense of community, structure, being of service, just, everything. There's a reason why the 12 steps, each one of them are important and that they're laid out the way they are. I personally don't think it's the only path to recovery. I think it's a really effective one for people who work the program. But for me, it was one of many things in my program of recovery. I was dealing with anxiety and doing therapy. I was dealing, I had to do an entire lifestyle overhaul to help my mind, body, and spirit recover. And so it wasn't, to me, only just that one element, but it was a very important element. I know that some people are reluctant to go into the 12 steps, or they might have their hangups about this or that version of recovery. I think there are common elements to every version, right? And the first step for all of them is acceptance, right? I mean, you're not going to get anywhere until you recognize what it is that's ailing you. You come to a place of humility and you're able to realize my way of doing things obviously clearly hasn't been working, and let me try to find another way. Let me humble myself to ask for help. And that's kind of the biggest message for me is there's so much stigma about asking for help and feeling weak, allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And so whatever journey you go on in recovery, the the bravest thing you can do, as cliche as it sounds, is to feel humbled and to ask for help, because that's when the journey begins. That's just the beginning, right? And the journey might look a little bit different for each person because every person is unique, and your particular case might need something specific that's different than my journey. But it starts with that humility, and then it's just one foot in front of the other, the next indicated action, the thing that's going to keep you moving forward rather than downward spiral. Just opening up yourself to life again, walking forward into the experience of connection and purpose and meaning in your life. Because when you're drinking yourself to death, those things go out the window, and you become more and more disconnected from the flow of living. So anything that brings you back into the flow of living, that brings you connection and purpose, and just whether it's the 12 steps or something else, it's about getting out there and connecting to it.
I agree 100%. And that's another thing I love about your book is that, there's parts in there that I'm like, wow, he went through a lot. And a lot of people would give up. They'd just be like, I'm not going to try harder to maintain this relationship. I'm not going to get help. And that was the same with me. At one point, it was like, I need help. Like, I can't do it. I've tried everything. And my pride was what made me fall every time. And it was still really hard for me to admit that I was an alcoholic because I was a functioning alcoholic for so long, and I didn't get a DUI, and I didn't go to jail. And the only thing I ruined was the most important thing to me. And that was my two daughters. And I would take 10 jail times to get back what I lost with my kids. And that is a lot of my message to women now. And it's I just published my first sobriety journal, and it's called Making the Change, and it's for women. And it was mostly because when I went to rehab, I ordered one online, and I was like, clearly this person has not been to rehab. like this needs to have a little more of this or that. So, but what I am so passionate about is moms getting sober. Right now, it's like okay to drink around the babies. It's okay to have a beer in your stroller. It's okay to, it's just okay. There's nothing wrong with it. And I can tell you right now, the only thing that is standing between me and my youngest daughter right now is the drinks that I took. And I would do anything to take that back. And so I'm very encouraging, and I give moms now so much credit for getting sober in this day and age, because it is hard, it is stressful, and a lot of times we're doing it by ourselves, and it's just very, very hard thing to go through on your own. And so with alcohol, that was my best friend. I've never felt alone because I always had that companion. And so I am, like you, very passionate about what took me down. And now I can, say to women, like, it's okay if you stop drinking. It's all right. You're going to be okay. It's going to be hard, but you'll be all right. God, I say this to everyone, I really feel like God saved me from myself. I was in control and I ruined it, and now I have to accept who I am and loosen the reins a little bit and give him more of the control. And